Hello and welcome to this JavaScript tutorial. Here I would like to discuss some advanced JavaScript topics. And I want to talk about JavaScript engine phases and about variables lifecycle. I want to do that in order to make you better understand what happens under the hood when you declare, for example, variable using var, or when you use const, let, or simply when you declare function. Before talking about variables lifecycle, let's talk about JavaScript engine phases. Before your code is executed, it is compiled. JavaScript engine performs compilation of your code. On this phase, JavaScript engine looks through entire code that you supply to the engine, and it finds all variable declarations that are present in your code. It looks through all scopes, global scope, function scope, and block scopes, and it creates special activation object with all variables. And then engine starts execution of your code. And on this phase, your code is executed line by line. But during execution, all variables are already declared in the internal memory of the JavaScript engine. And JavaScript knows about scopes for each variable. Of course, this is a simplified process, and JavaScript engine performs more tasks than I have just described. But I want to make you just understand concept. And this concept is following. JavaScript engine runs code in two phases. First compilation and next execution. Let's move on, and next let's talk about variable lifecycle process. It consists of three phases. Let's talk about them next. See you in a couple of seconds. Bye. Let's now talk about variable lifecycle phases. You already used variable declaration, and you have used variable assignment. For example, var a is variable declaration, and a is equal to 10 is variable assignment. But that is a declaration and assignment in the JavaScript code. In the JavaScript engine, there are three different phases for each variable, and they are called declaration, initialization, and assignment. And this declaration is not this declaration. This declaration and this declaration are different. This declaration is used just to declare a variable inside of the JavaScript file, nothing else. And this declaration is performed inside of the JavaScript engine. And on this phase, variable is registered in the corresponding scope. For example, if you declare variable a here in the global scope, then JavaScript engine will declare this variable in the global scope. After declaration comes variable initialization. And on this phase, JavaScript engine allocates memory for each variable, and if variable is declared here in the JavaScript code using var, then it will get automatic value undefined. Let's prove this. Let's simply declare variable a here, save the file, and if I'll try to access a here, I'll get undefined. That is what happens with variable a. It is declared and initialized using JavaScript engine. And third phase is assignment. On this phase, certain value is assigned to already initialized variable. And if you perform assignment in the JavaScript code, like this a equal to 10, then same assignment is performed on this phase in the JavaScript engine. And now if I will try to retrieve value of the a, I'll get 10. It means that in this case, variable was already declared, initialized, and assigned in the JavaScript engine. Let me show another example. Let's create a function, and this function will take one parameter a. And let's simply log inside of this function a, like this. And let's call this function fn without any parameters, and let's save the file. And here you'll get undefined. It means that on this step, variable a is already declared and initialized using JavaScript engine. But we have not used even var or let or const keywords. It is just parameter inside of the function. But JavaScript engine is clever enough and it has performed initialization of this variable a. If I will delete this parameter here and save the file, I'll get uncaught reference error a is not defined. That's because a was not declared and of course not initialized using JavaScript engine. And if I'll get back to a and save the file, I'll get undefined here. It means that in this case, variable a was declared inside of the function scope and it was initialized with undefined value. That's why I am able to access it here and I'll get value undefined. If I'll try to access this variable a outside of the function, of course I'll get reference error a is not defined. Okay, let's delete this and summarize. There are three different phases in variable lifecycle process, and they are called declaration phase, initialization phase, and assignment phase. And those phases are completed inside of the JavaScript engine. On the declaration phase, variable is registered in the corresponding scope, for example in global scope or function scope or block scope. Then variable is initialized. It means that specific part in the memory is allocated to this variable, and after that variable is assigned. On this phase, specific value is assigned to the initialized variable. After declaration phase, variable is considered as declared. After initialization phase, variable is called initialized, and after assignment phase, variable is called assigned. Please keep in mind all those three phases because we will talk about them later on. And next, let's talk about declaration, initialization, and assignment of variables declared using var keyword. And we will also discuss when those lifecycle phases occur. I mean, either on compilation stage or execution stage in JavaScript engine. It may look complicated, but no worries, it is pretty simple. And next, let's talk about variable declaration using var. See you in a bit. Bye. Now let's focus on the lifecycle of different variable types. We will talk about lifecycle for var, undeclared variable, let, const, and function. And first will be var. I have splitted here declaration, initialization, and assignment into two JavaScript engine phases, compilation and execution. Declaration and initialization of the var occur on the compilation phase, and those variable lifecycle phases are bundled together. It means that after declaration, when JavaScript engine registers variable in the scope, immediately starts initialization, and variable is initialized with undefined value. But that is only related to var. With let and const it will be different. And then, when code is executed line by line, and when JavaScript engine hits such line as assignment of the value to the variable, third variable lifecycle phase occurs, and it is assignment. And after this phase, variable will become assigned and will have value, in this case 10. Let's look at this in action. Let's declare variable var a, and before its declaration, I'll assign value to it, a equal 20. What happens here? When JavaScript engine performs compilation phase. It scans this code and finds all variable declarations. And it finds this line. And when this line is found, those two phases, declaration and initialization, are performed on JavaScript engine. And variable gets value undefined. That's why if I'll try to do following, for example, I'll comment this line for a moment and console log A. Save the file, and here I'll get undefined. That's because on execution stage, variable A is already declared and initialized here, and it has value undefined. That's why I am able to access this variable here above its declaration in the code. But if I do following, uncomment this line and save, when JavaScript engine executes code and hits this line, it will perform assignment of the value to the variable. And after this, variable is assigned and has certain value. And in this case, value is 20, and on this line I am able to access this value, because variable is already assigned. Let me split this example into two examples without assignment. And here I'll get undefined. And next example with assignment a equal 20, and I'll get 20 here. And let me rename those variables to b. Okay, another example with function. Let's declare function fn. No worries, we will talk about function declarations later on. Now we are focused just on var. And here inside of the function, I'll declare variable c. Let's perform same. Try to access variable c here before its declaration here. Let me comment those examples and just call function here. Let's save, and now I'll get same result, undefined for variable c. But at this moment, when JavaScript engine scans entire code, it finds that variable c is declared inside of the function scope, and variable c will be declared and initialized inside of the function scope. But again, value will be undefined. And when JavaScript engine during execution phase hits this line, it already has c in memory in this scope, and that's why I get undefined here. But if I will try to access variable c outside of the function scope here, of course I'll get a reference error, c is not defined. Because variable c is bound to the function scope. And it happened on the compilation phase in JavaScript engine. And here I get undefined. And of course, if I'll add another variable, for example, variable d, and let me assign value to it first, d equal 10, and then console log d, and then declare this d. Let's save this. Oh, let me comment this line. And now I'll get undefined and 10. In this case, variable d was declared and initialized with undefined value on the compilation phase. And on the execution phase, when JavaScript engine saw this line, it has assigned value to the variable d. That's why on this line I am able to access value of the variable d. And of course, d will be undefined here, outside of the function scope. d is not defined. Here it is. Please note that behavior will not change if I'll move this declaration of the c here at the top of the function. Let's save this, and there is no difference. Because in fact, JavaScript engine does declaration in this way. Actually, var d is also put here above. That's how JavaScript engine executes code. It already has declarations of variable c and d. independent of the place of their declaration here in the code. I'll leave it like this here in this example. Of course, before we have discussed that you must define variable before usage, but again, we are talking here about variable lifecycle, and this example is very important for understanding of this two-phase process. Okay, let me comment this out. And let's move on to next topic. And next we will discuss following. What will happen if you will not declare variable here in the function scope at all? How this variable will be initialized and declared using JavaScript engine? Let's talk about this next. See you in a bit. Bye. In this lecture, let's talk about undeclared variable. Undeclared variable may appear in your code if you don't use useStrict option. If you use useStrict, of course, you will get an error if any variable is not defined. But let's examine the case when useStrict is absent. And what happens if you assign value to the variable somewhere inside of your code, either in the global scope or in a function scope or in the block scope, doesn't matter. In this case, you see that nothing will happen on the compilation phase. When JavaScript engine will read your code, it will not do anything with this variable a. No declaration, no initialization, nothing. And only when code is executed and JavaScript engine hits this line, this variable will be immediately declared, initialized, and assigned. All three phases together. And what is more interesting, variable will be declared in the global scope. And of course, it will get value that you assign to it, in this case 10. But why is it declared in the global scope? Let's look at an example. Let's create a function fn, and here inside of the function, I'll simply use another function fn2, and in this inner function, I'll assign value to variable a. Here inside of the fn function, I'll call fn2 function, like this. And then outside of the fn function, in the global scope, I'll call fn function. And let's add console log a here, before a, console log a. And let's see what will happen. Let's save the file, and I'll get reference error a is not defined. At the moment of compilation, when JavaScript engine looks throughout the code and tries to find all variable declarations, it doesn't find declaration for variable a. That's why variable a is not declared and of course is not initialized. This code is executed in following way. First comes this function call, then engine starts execution of this function, hits this line, call to function 2, and executes function 2, line by line. And when engine hits this line, it sees that there is no a variable declared or initialized in its internal memory. That's why we immediately get reference error a is not defined. Let me add comment here, a is not defined. And if I will comment out this line and add console log a here, like this, and save the file, I'll get 10. Because now engine hits this line and it immediately declares, initializes, and assigns value to the variable a. And after this, I am able to access variable a. And what is more interesting, I am able to access variable a here, outside of the fn2 function, and here, in the global scope. Let's save the file, and I'll get 3 values of a. It means that when engine hits this line, it looks for variable declaration here inside of the scope of fn2 function. It doesn't find it, and then it looks in outer scope, that is a fn function for function 2. It also doesn't find declaration of variable a here. I mean declaration in the memory. And then it looks in the global scope. And again, no variable a found in global scope. And only after that, this variable a is automatically declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. That's why I'm able to access it here. And this variable a is present in the window object as a property. Here it is. That's what happens when you don't use useStrict option and not declare variable properly. In this case, any variables that are not declared will be automatically declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. Such variables are exposed to all functions in your code. They will become available everywhere. And that's violate one of the guidelines that we have discussed before. You must hide variables as much as possible. And in this case, if you declare variable a with var and save the file, of course you will get a reference error, a is not defined, for example here, and of course here. Now variable a is declared and initialized on the compilation phase, and on the execution phase, value 10 is assigned to it. Okay, I'll remove this declaration. And let me add here a comment. A is declared in the global scope. Let's save this and let's move on to next topic. And next we will talk about let and its behavior on those phases. See you in a second. Bye. Now let's talk about let lifecycle phases. And in this lecture, you'll finally understand why you are not able to use variable declared with let before its actual declaration in the code. Here things become more interesting, because here declaration phase is performed on compilation phase in JavaScript engine, but initialization and assignment are performed on the execution phase. What does it mean? During compilation phase, when engine finds declaration of variable a using let, it finds, for example, this line let a, it declares variable in corresponding scope. But variable becomes declared but uninitialized. It means that if you will try to access variable declared with let before this line, you'll get an error, a is not defined. And this period between start of the code and till this line of code is called temporal dead zone. And it tells you that you are not able to access variable until you hit this line where this variable is declared. That's why you are not able to use variable before its actual declaration in the code. And when JavaScript engine hits this line, let a, in the execution phase, it initializes variable, and variable gets value undefined. And later on, if you assign value to this variable will become assigned and will have assigned value 10 in this example. That's the process for let. Let's look at this in action. Let's first declare variable a using let a. And let's try to access variable a before its declaration in the code. Console log a. Save the file, and of course you'll get reference error, a is not defined. What happens here is this. JavaScript engine scans this code on the compilation phase, finds this declaration, and declares variable and assigns it to the global scope in this case. It means that before execution phase, JavaScript engine already knows about this variable. Actually, this happens inside of the JavaScript engine. But in your code, order is opposite. And that's why if you will try to access variable a before its actual declaration, you will hit temporal dead zone, where you are not able to access variable that is not yet initialized. And only when a variable is initialized, if I'll move console log here, I will be able to access A. Because on execution phase, when JavaScript engine found this declaration, let A, it has initialized variable and value will become undefined. And of course, after initialization, I'm able to access this variable. And then probably I'll assign value to variable A and console log A again. And of course, on this line, variable is already assigned. Okay, I'll add a comment here, A is not defined. On this line, variable is initialized, A is initialized with undefined. Here I'll get undefined. Here variable is assigned, A is assigned, and has value 10. And of course here I'll get 10. That is a process with let. And this process does not change depending on the scope. If you will move all those lines into the function, let's add function here, function fn, and let's suppose that this will happen inside of the function, and then I'll call this function fn. Nothing will change in fact. Let's save this, and nothing changed here. But now variable A is declared inside of the function scope here. And of course, if you will try to access variable A here outside of the function scope, you'll get reference error, A is not defined. Let's add comment here, not defined. And let's copy those lines, comment this part. Here is a function example, and above will be example in the global scope. Okay, let's save this. One more important difference between let and var that we haven't discussed before. If I'll try to access A here, I'll get 10, because variable is already declared, initialized, and assigned. But if I will try to access window.a, remember that window is a global object and I'm trying to access its property A, I'll get undefined. But if I will declare A with var and save the file, if I will try to access window A again, I'll get 10. That is the difference between var and let. If you declare variable with let, then this variable is not added as a property to the global window object. That's why I get undefined. And if I access simply window, I will not find A here on the list. Okay, that is the process with let. And now you understand what happens when you try to access variable declared with let before its actual declaration in the code. And in fact, you simply hit this temporal dead zone where variable is declared but is not yet initialized. Let's quickly try one more thing. I'll comment this part, and here I'll add two lines, A equal 10 and let A. If I'll save code now, I'll get reference error, A is not defined. But if I comment out this let A and save the file, I get nothing. And if I will try to access A, I'll get 10. With let A, as you see, I am not able to perform assignment because in this case, variable A is declared in the global scope, but not yet initialized. And if I try to perform assignment to this variable, of course I get error, A is not defined. But if I comment out this line and save the file, what happens in this case? Do you have an answer? In fact, we have discussed it in previous lecture. And if you don't declare variable, it is declared automatically in the global scope. And it is declared using var. And now, if I'll try to access window A, I'll get 10. because A is now one of the properties of the global object window. Here it is. Okay, let me delete this, uncomment this part, save the file, and let's move on, and next we will talk about lifecycle of the const. See you in the next lecture. Bye. In this lecture we will talk about lifecycle of the const. We have already discussed lifecycle of the var, let, and undeclared variables. And now it's time to talk about const. But before talking about const, let me shortly recap what is temporal dead zone. Temporal dead zone is special interval between start of the code execution here and till declaration of the variable using let or const. And if you will try to access variable in this temporal dead zone, you'll get reference error, variable is not defined. What does it mean access? It can be assignment of the value to the variable or simply console log this variable. That is also accessing variable. And this happens because variable is already declared on the compilation phase, but is not yet initialized on the execution phase. And this zone is present when you define variables using const. Diagram is pretty similar to let, here it is, but as you see with let, initialization and assignment phases may be separated. But with const, initialization and assignment are bundled together. Why? Answer is pretty simple, we have discussed it before. You are not able to just declare a variable using const like this, without assignment of the value. You must always assign value to the variable that is declared using const, like this. And that's why initialization and assignment are performed just in one shift. Okay, let's summarize what happens with const. If you use const somewhere in your code, then on compilation phase, when JavaScript engine scans your code, it finds those declarations in corresponding scopes and declares those variables. It registers them in corresponding scope. And at this point, variable is declared but not yet initialized. And on the execution phase, when code is executed, and when JavaScript engine sees this line, it performs initialization and assignment. And variable becomes initialized and assigned. And it has value, in this example, 10. Before this line, variable is located in temporal dead zone. And if you will try to access it, of course you'll get an error, A is not defined. Same behavior as with let. Okay, let's try this in action. Let's add const A equal 10. And if I'll try to access it here, console log A, of course I will get 10, because at this point variable is declared, initialized and assigned. But if I will try to move this console log statement here above, and let me comment this line, I'll get a reference error, A is not defined. On the compilation phase, all declarations of variable using const are found, and A is registered in the global scope, but it is not yet initialized. And when code is executed, this console log statement is located in the temporal dead zone for this variable A. And that's why when I'm trying to access variable A here, I get reference error, A is not defined. Not defined. Let's comment this line, and here, of course, I'll get 10, because variable is defined, initialized and assigned. Of course, if I'll try to do something like this, remove assignment, I'll get syntax error, missing initializer in const declaration, because you are not allowed to initialize variable declared with const without its assignment. Those phases are bundled together. Okay, let's get back to assignment here and save the file. Of course, if you will try to declare const in the block, let's add a block, const b equal 1, console log b, you'll get 10 and 1. But if you will try to access b here, console log b, you will not be able to do that. because B is limited to this block, as we have discussed before in the previous lectures. And in this case, what happens? On the compilation phase, two variables are declared. Variable A is declared in the global scope, and variable B is declared in corresponding block scope in this one. When JavaScript engine performs execution of the code and hits this line, A is initialized and assigned in the global scope. When this line is hit, then B is initialized and assigned in this block scope. And that's why if you try to access B here, you get reference error, B is not defined. That is the process with const. It is much simpler than with let because assignment and initialization are bundled together. But again, it also has temporal dead zone, that's why you must define const and assign value to it before its actual usage. Okay, let's move on, and next let's talk about function lifecycle. It's an interesting part. See you in a bit, bye. Now it's time for interesting part. Function lifecycle. Probably you thought that function in JavaScript is something different than simple variable, but in fact it is simple variable, and it is declared, initialized and assigned same as any other variables. Here is example of the function declaration. Function, then comes name, then in parentheses list of parameters, and in curly braces statements inside of the body of the function. And when JavaScript engine finds such function declaration somewhere in the code, it immediately performs all three steps in variable lifecycle. It declares this function, it registers it in corresponding scope, then it initializes it and assigns value to it. And value of the function is actually list of statements that is located here in the body of the function. It is pretty simple. That's why you are able to define function anywhere in the scope and access it anywhere above, because variable is ready to use on the execution phase. Let's now look at this in action. Let's declare function smile, without any parameters, and in the body of the function I'll console log smile. And here, down below, let's call this function. If I'll save it, I'll get smile here in the console. What happens here? On compilation phase, JavaScript engine finds this function declaration. Function declaration consists of keyword function, smile, that is the name of the function, and contents of the function. And this function is immediately declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. That's why I am able to access it anywhere. I can access it here above. And now I get two smiles. I am able to access it here because function smile is already declared, initialized, and assigned before execution phase. Let's now do following. Let's add console log statement here, console log, and log simply smile. I don't add parentheses here because I don't want to call this function. I simply want to log contents of this variable because smile is usual variable. Let's save this. And here in the console I get result in the string format, and here you see contents of the function. And again, I am able to access this variable here because of this. Because function is declared, initialized, and assigned before code execution. Let me quickly add some comments here. Function contents in the string format. Then here I call function. Function is initialized, declared, and assigned. Declared, initialized, and assigned. And here I simply declare function in the code. In fact, inside of the JavaScript engine, this happens. this function declaration is moved at the top of the global scope. But in our code, this function declaration sits here. Okay, and here, of course, we successfully invoke function. And let me add comment here above, function declaration. Because this is function declaration. Let's comment this example and let's move to next one. In the next example, I'll use function expression. What is function expression? Function without any name and simply console log. That's function expression. Like this. This is called function expression. And if I simply save this, I'll immediately get error unexpected token here. That's because I am not able to use simply function expression in this way. I can add parentheses here, for example, and then save this. And now error is gone. In such a way, we have turned this function expression into the statement. You see semicolon here. But in fact, this piece of code doesn't do any job here. JavaScript engine simply goes through it and doesn't perform any actions. Because this function doesn't have any name, that's why it is not declared anywhere, and it is not invoked, that's why we don't see this console log message in the console. But I can call this function directly here. If I'll save file now, I'll get this console log message. And that is called immediately invoked function expression. I'll add a comment here. If immediately invoked function expression. And actually, nothing from those phases happens here. Function is simply executed and gone. I don't want to dive deeper into ifs here, but I wanted to just explain the concept of the function expressions. Let's comment this line and let's do following. If you want to use function expression, you can assign it to variable. But let's now make short pause and go on with this in the next lecture. See you in a second. Bye. Okay, let's go on and let's create function expression and assign it to the variable. Like this. Const sum equal to function that takes two parameters a and b, and then return a plus b. And now this function expression on the right side, in fact it is anonymous function expression because it doesn't have any name. Now it is assigned to the const sum. Let me add here comment, function expression assigned to the variable. And now it is statement, and I need to add semicolon here. If I'll save it, I don't see any errors here, because now it is valid statement, valid assignment. Let's now call this function here down below. Sum 5 and 10, and in order to see something in the console, I'll add console log here. Save the file, and now I get 15 here. What happens now? In fact, now JavaScript engine does this job. It finds const declaration here. Sum is the name of the variable. It declares this variable in the global scope in this case, but it not yet initializes it. And only on the execution phase here, when JavaScript engine finds this assignment, this one, this variable sum is initialized and assigned. And that's why after this assignment I am able to call this function here. If I'll try to do same here above, let's save this, I'll get reference error, sum is not defined. Because now I am calling sum in temporal dead zone. That's why you are not able to call functions declared in such way. It is not actually a function, it is a function expression assigned to the variable. You're not able to call it because of this. Because you declare this function using const, and const has temporal dead zone. Let's try to change const to var here and save this. Now I get another error. Sum is not a function. Why this happens? Let's get back to the diagram with var. Here it is. In this case, on the compilation phase, variable sum is declared and initialized and has value undefined. That's why when I am trying to access sum here, it tells me that sum is not a function, because sum is undefined here. Console log sum. It is undefined. That is the behavior if you use var here. If you use let instead of var or const, of course you will get same error as with const. Sum is not defined. Let's get back to const, because normally const is used if you want to assign function expression to the variable. That is the difference between function expressions here and function declaration here. With function declaration, you are able to access function because of this. Because function is declared, initialized and assigned on the compilation phase. And with function expression here, it is not the case. Because now it is simply variable that is declared using const. And on this line, sum is located in the temporal dead zone, TDZ here. And only here, after sum was initialized and assigned, you are able to call it. That is the behavior of function expressions. I hope now you understand this difference and you are able to use function expressions and function declarations appropriately. Let's summarize. If you use function declaration, then JavaScript engine will perform declaration, initialization and assignment of this variable. I am calling this variable because function is a variable, all together. And this happens before execution phase. That's why you are able to access functions that are declared in such way before actual declaration in the code. But if you use function expression assigned to the variable, like in this example, you're not able to call such functions before this assignment. You must first assign function expression to the variable and only then call it. That is an important difference. Remember that before we have discussed following guideline. You should define variables before their usage. And if you will follow this guideline, you should place this piece of code here above. But this guideline is for variables declared using var, let and const. With functions, it may be helpful in some cases, especially when developing external modules, and we will talk about this later on. Now you should understand what happens under the hood when you declare functions like this or declare variables using var, let and const. And finally, let's say what is hoisting. And let's do this next. Answer will be pretty simple and lecture will be very short. See you in a bit, bye. After all those lectures about variable lifecycle, question: what is hoisting? Answer is pretty simple. Hoisting is a term that describes process of compilation and execution phases. Nothing else. And different variables behave differently in terms of hoisting, because of different behavior on compilation and execution phases. For example, let and const are only declared on the compilation phase, and that's why you're not able to access them before actual declaration inside of the code, because of temporal dead zone. If you use var, then variable is declared and initialized on the compilation phase. That's why you say that variable is hoisted, and you are able to access it before actual declaration in the code. Pretty simple. Same with functions. Functions are also hoisted, because on the compilation phase, with function declarations, as we have just discussed in the previous lecture, JavaScript engine performs declaration, initialization and assignment all together. That's why on the execution phase, you are able to invoke any function that was declared somewhere below. And this is called function hoisting. Pretty simple. And now you fully understand this process. If you enjoyed this tutorial and it was helpful for you, please smash like button. If this tutorial sucks, thumbs down. Please leave a comment and of course subscribe to this channel. I have more stuff coming for you. See you in the next tutorials. Bye bye.